The dust swirled in lazy spirals outside the weathered chapel, carried on a wind that had traveled hundreds of miles across the plains before finding this forgotten corner of Wyoming territory. It was Sunday morning in Cedar Ridge, and the bell tower's bronze voice rang out across the settlement, calling the faithful and the curious alike. Inside the small sanctuary, Reverend Caleb Hart gripped the edges of the pulpit, his calloused hands betraying a past that had known more than scripture and prayer. At 32, he cut an unusual figure for a preacher, broad shoulders that filled out his simple black coat, sun-weathered skin that spoke of years under open skies, and eyes the color of prairie grass after rain. Those eyes now swept across his congregation, taking in the familiar faces of ranchers, shopkeepers, and their families who made up his flock. "The Lord speaks to us of companionship," Caleb began, his voice carrying the gentle drawl of Texas mixed with something harder, something earned. "In Genesis, he said, 'It is not good for man to be alone,' and I stand before you today, brothers and sisters, to confess a truth that weighs upon my heart." Old Mrs. Henderson in the front pew leaned forward, her hearing trumpet aimed at the pulpit. Behind her, the Garrison family sat in their usual spot, their 7 children arranged like stair-steps from tallest to smallest. The morning light filtered through the chapel's single stained-glass window, casting fragments of colored light across the worn pine floors. "The preacher wanted a bride," Caleb continued, a rueful smile touching his lips. "Not for riches, not for convenience, but for a place to rest his faith and heart. For even a man of God grows weary of empty rooms and silent suppers." A murmur ran through the congregation. It wasn't often their pastor spoke so personally from the pulpit. Since his arrival in Cedar Ridge 3 years prior, Caleb Hart had been a steady presence ministering to the sick, mediating disputes, helping with barn raisings and harvests. But he'd kept his own struggles close to his vest, the way men did out here where vulnerability could be as dangerous as a rattlesnake. The chapel door creaked open. Every head turned, the sermon forgotten. In the doorway stood a woman who seemed to have materialized from the morning light itself. She wore a traveling dress of deep burgundy, dusty from the road but well made. Speaking of better circumstances than most folks in Cedar Ridge could claim, a small valise rested at her feet, and she held herself with a dignity that seemed both natural and hard-won. "Pardon the interruption," she said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of somewhere back east. "I was told there was a service." "All are welcome in the Lord's house," Caleb replied, though his words came out rougher than intended. "Please, come in." The woman, she couldn't have been more than 25, moved down the aisle with measured steps. Her hair, the color of chestnuts in autumn, was pinned up properly beneath a modest hat. But it was her eyes that held Caleb's attention, gray as storm clouds, carrying shadows that spoke of stories untold. She chose a pew near the back, settling in with quiet grace. But her presence had already set tongues wagging. Caleb could hear the whispers starting, see the meaningful glances exchanged between the town's matrons. He cleared his throat and returned to his sermon, though the words felt different now, charged with new meaning. "We are called to welcome the stranger, to show kindness to those who journey far from home." As he spoke, Caleb found his gaze drawn repeatedly to the newcomer. She sat with perfect stillness, hands folded in her lap, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was ready to bolt at the slightest provocation, like a deer that had learned to be wary of open ground. The service concluded with the usual hymn, voices raised in Rock of Ages, while Mrs. Garrison pumped the wheezing organ. As the congregation filed out, exchanging pleasantries and gossip in equal measure, Caleb positioned himself at the door to greet his flock. "Fine sermon, Reverend," said Tom McKay, the blacksmith, his massive hand engulfing Caleb's in a crushing shake. "About time you thought of settling down. My sister's cousin in Cheyenne. She's a widow, good Christian woman." "I appreciate the thought." "Tom," Caleb interrupted gently, his attention already shifting to the woman in burgundy approaching the door. Up close, he could see the fine lines of fatigue around her eyes, the careful way she held herself as if expecting judgment. When she extended her gloved hand, he took it carefully, noting how it trembled slightly before she steadied it. "Thank you for the welcome, Reverend Hart, Caleb Hart." He released her hand reluctantly. "And you are—" A pause, just long enough to be noticed. "Margaret Thornfield, Maggie." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. Caleb had learned to read people during his years wandering the territories before finding his calling. This woman, Maggie, carried secrets like some folks carried weapons, close and hidden, but always there. "Will you be staying in Cedar Ridge long, Miss Thornfield?" "That remains to be seen." She glanced past him to where several townswomen had gathered, their expressions ranging from curious to suspicious. "Is there a boarding house or hotel where I might find lodging?" "Mrs. Carlyle runs a respectable establishment 2 streets over," Caleb said. "I'd be happy to escort you." "That's quite all right." Maggie's smile was polite but distant. "I'm sure I can find my way. Good day, Reverend Hart." She was gone before he could respond, leaving only the faint scent of lavender and travel dust in her wake. Caleb watched her navigate the rutted main street, noting how she sidestepped a drunk stumbling out of the Red Dog Saloon without breaking stride, a woman who'd learned to avoid trouble. Well, looks like our good Reverend has taken notice of the new arrival. Caleb didn't need to turn to recognize the voice. Samuel Watson, owner of the town's general store and head of the church board, had a talent for making observations sound like accusations. "I notice all newcomers to our town. Sam, it's part of my calling." "Is that so?" Watson's thin lips curved in what might charitably be called a smile. "Well, you might want to be careful with that one. She's got the look of trouble about her. Mark my words, a woman like that, traveling alone, no wedding ring, dressed finer than honest folk, there's a story there, and not a godly one. I'd wager." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." "Sam, isn't that what the good book tells us?" Watson sniffed. "The good book also warns about wolves in sheep's clothing. Reverend, just remember that." He tipped his hat and strode off, no doubt to spread his concerns to anyone who'd listen. The sun climbed higher, beating down on Cedar Ridge with the relentless intensity of late summer. Caleb made his rounds checking on the widow Martinez, whose arthritis had been acting up, discussing the fall harvest festival with the town council, mediating a dispute between 2 ranchers over water rights. But through it all, his thoughts kept returning to sad gray eyes and careful lies. It was near sunset when the thunder of hooves announced a new arrival. Caleb, sitting on the chapel steps reviewing his notes for Wednesday's prayer meeting, looked up to see a rider approaching at full gallop, even silhouetted against the dying light. The figure cut an impressive sight tall in the saddle, handling the spirited bay stallion with the easy grace of someone born to it. The rider pulled up in a cloud of dust directly in front of the chapel. As the dust settled, Caleb found himself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the landscape itself, weathered, hard, and undeniably commanding. Ethan Cole had returned to Cedar Ridge. "Reverend," Ethan said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep, roughened by trail dust and something else. Pain, maybe, or anger. "Heard there was a new preacher in town. Thought I should pay my respects." Caleb stood, extending his hand. "Caleb Hart, and you're Ethan Cole. I've heard about you." Ethan's grip was firm, testing. "All bad, I'm sure." "On the contrary. Folks say you've done well for yourself. Built quite a spread up north." "Folks say a lot of things." Ethan dismounted, moving with the controlled grace of a man who'd learned to be ready for anything. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of good whiskey. The kind of man who'd known violence and success in equal measure, and carried both like scars. "What brings you back to Cedar Ridge?" Caleb asked. though something in Ethan's expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Business," Ethan said shortly. "And maybe other things. Heard there was a woman came to town this morning, traveling alone. News travels fast." "It does when the woman looks like—" Ethan cut himself off, jaw clenching. "Where's she staying?" "That's not really my place to say, Mr. Cole." Ethan studied him for a long moment, and Caleb had the uncomfortable feeling of being measured and catalogued. Finally, the cowboy nodded. "Fair enough. Reverend. But a word of advice, sometimes the past has a way of catching up. No matter how far or fast you run, that woman's got ghosts trailing her, and they'll bring nothing but trouble to this town. We all have ghosts, Mr. Cole. The question is whether we let them define us." Something shifted in Ethan's expression: surprise, maybe, or respect. "You're not what I expected in a preacher. I'll take that as a compliment. Take it however you want." Ethan swung back into the saddle. "I'll be around for a while. Reckon we'll be seeing more of each other." As he rode off toward the saloon district, Caleb was left with the distinct impression that Cedar Ridge had just become a much more complicated place. Two strangers in one day, both carrying secrets, both connected by threads he couldn't yet see but could feel tightening like a noose. The preacher wanted a bride. He'd said that morning, but as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Caleb Hart suspected the Lord might have something else entirely in mind. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Ridge's main street as Maggie Thornfield emerged from Mrs. Carlyle's boarding house. 3 days had passed since her arrival, and already she could feel the weight of watching eyes wherever she went. She pulled her shawl tighter, though the chill she felt had nothing to do with the weather. The general store was her destination, needles and thread, she told herself. Perhaps some fabric. Simple errands for a simple life. That's what she'd come here seeking: simplicity, anonymity. A chance to disappear into the vast spaces of the West where a person's past mattered less than their willingness to work. But Cedar Ridge, she was learning, was not that place. "Miss Thornfield." Samuel Watson's voice dripped honey over poison as she entered his store. "How nice to see you this morning. Finding everything you need at Mrs. Carlyle's?" "Yes, thank you." Maggie kept her voice neutral, moving toward the fabric display. Other customers, 2 ranch wives she'd seen at church, stopped their conversation to stare. "Must be quite a change from back east," Watson continued, following her. "Philadelphia, wasn't it? Or was it Boston?" She hadn't told anyone where she'd come from. "I'd prefer to focus on the present, Mr. Watson." Of course. Though folks do wonder. A lady of obvious refinement, traveling alone, settling in a frontier town. It's only natural to be curious. Natural. Maggie's fingers tightened on the bolt of calico she'd been examining. Nothing about her situation was natural, not the lies she told, not the fear that dogged her steps, not the careful distance she maintained from everyone she met. The store bell chimed, and Reverend Hart entered, bringing with him the scent of leather and sunshine. His presence filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size and everything to do with the quiet authority he carried. "Morning, Sam, ladies." He touched his hat brim to the ranch wives, who giggled like schoolgirls. At 32, unmarried, and undeniably handsome. Caleb Hart was the subject of much speculation among Cedar Ridge's female population. "Miss Thornfield." "Reverend." She managed a small smile, grateful for the interruption. "I was hoping to speak with you." Caleb said, "Mrs. Martinez could use some help with her mending. Her arthritis makes needlework difficult. I thought perhaps—" "I'd be happy to help," Maggie said quickly. Anything to escape Watson's interrogation. "How charitable," Watson murmured. "Though one wonders what a lady of your apparent station knows about simple mending." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. I assure you, Mr. Watson, I'm quite capable with a needle. Not all skills are determined by one's station. Indeed. Caleb's voice carried a warning edge. Judge not by appearances. Sam, now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Thornfield and I have calls to make. Outside. Maggie drew a shaky breath. Thank you. Sam Watson is a small man with small thoughts. Caleb said, Pay him no mind. They walked in silence for a moment, Maggie acutely aware of curious faces peering from windows. Is there really a Mrs. Martinez who needs help? Caleb's smile was answer enough. There's always someone who needs help, Miss Thornfield, though I confess I may have exaggerated the urgency. He paused. You're going to face questions here. It's the nature of small towns. But not everyone is like Sam Watson. And what about you? Reverend, don't you have questions? Plenty, but I figure a person's entitled to their privacy until they choose otherwise. It was more grace than she'd been shown in months. Maggie blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. You're very kind. I'm practical. This territory is full of people running from something or towards something. Sometimes both. What matters is who they choose to be once they stop running. They'd reached a small adobe house on the edge of town. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a vegetable garden struggled against the dry soil. Caleb knocked, and an elderly Mexican woman answered, her face creasing into a warm smile. Padre, come in, come in. The next hour passed in the comfortable rhythm of domestic tasks. Maggie's fingers flew over the mending while Mrs. Martinez chattered in a mix of Spanish and English, plying them with strong coffee and stories of her late husband. It was the most at peace Maggie had felt since before. You have good hands. Mija. Mrs. Martinez observed, steady, patient. These are gifts. My mother taught me, Maggie said softly. She believed a lady should be useful as well as ornamental. Your mother sounds wise. She was. The past tense hurt more than Maggie expected. Another bridge burned. Another connection severed in her flight from scandal. Caleb had been largely quiet, helping with heavier chores around the small house. But Maggie could feel him watching her, not with Watson's predatory curiosity, but with something gentler, more dangerous in its way. They left as the sun reached its zenith, walking back toward town. Maggie felt the weight of what awaited her there, the whispers, the speculation, the careful dance of maintaining her fiction. There's going to be a church social Saturday evening, Caleb said. Nothing fancy, just a potluck supper and some music. You should come. I don't think that would be wise. Why not? How could she explain that she'd learned to read the signs of a community turning against her, that she could already feel the undertow of suspicion pulling at her feet, that getting close to anyone, especially him, was a luxury she couldn't afford? Reverend Hart. Caleb, please. Caleb. His name felt dangerous on her tongue. You don't know anything about me. I know you're kind to old women. I know you're educated but not proud. I know you're carrying hurt that's eating you alive. He stopped walking, turning to face her. And I know you're not Margaret Thornfield. The blood drained from her face. I don't know what you mean. The initials on your valise. CLM? The way you hesitated when you gave your name? The fact that you flinch whenever someone mentions the East Coast newspapers that come through on the stage. Maggie's hand went to her throat. Are you going to... I'm not going to do anything. Like I said, you're entitled to your privacy. But I want you to know that whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone. You don't know what you're saying. If people knew, if they found out, then we make sure they don't find out until you're ready. The simplicity of his offer protection without questions, help without conditions nearly undid her. She'd been alone so long, carrying her burden in silence, that the prospect of sharing it with anyone seemed impossible. A shout from the main street interrupted whatever she might have said. They hurried forward to find a crowd gathering outside the saloon. At its center, Ethan Cole faced off against 3 cowboys from the Rocking J Ranch, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. "Say that again," Ethan growled, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "Just speaking the truth, Cole." One of the cowboys sneered. He was young, drunk on whiskey and his own bravado. "Everybody knows why you really came back, chasing after that fancy woman, the one who done you wrong back in—" Ethan moved faster than thought. His fist connected with the cowboy's jaw, sending him sprawling in the dust. The other 2 went for their guns, but Ethan already had his drawn, the barrel steady despite the rage in his eyes. "Enough!" Caleb strode into the circle, positioning himself between the combatants. "Put the guns away, all of you." "Stay out of this, preacher," one of the cowboys snarled. "I'm making it my business. You boys are drunk and stupid, which is a dangerous combination. Head on back to the Rocking J before someone gets hurt." "You threatening us?" "I'm offering you wisdom. Take it or leave it." There was something in Caleb's stance, in the quiet confidence of his words, that suggested the preacher might be more than he appeared. The cowboys exchanged glances, then slowly holstered their weapons. "This ain't over, Cole," one muttered as they retreated. Ethan holstered his own gun, his eyes finding Maggie in the crowd. The look that passed between them was electric, full of history and hurt. Then he turned and stalked away without a word. "Exciting morning," someone murmured, and the crowd began to disperse, already spinning the story into something larger than life. Maggie stood frozen, her worst fears materializing. Ethan knew her, had known her from the moment he'd arrived. The careful fiction she'd built was crumbling, and she could see the questions forming in the faces around her. "Walk with me," Caleb said quietly, taking her elbow. He guided her away from the curious stares, back toward the church, inside the cool sanctuary. Maggie sank into a pew, shaking. "He knows me," she whispered. "Ethan Cole. We knew each other before, back east. If he tells people—" "He won't." "You don't know that. You don't know what happened between us. She broke off, unable to voice the shame that haunted her. Caleb sat beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Whatever happened, it's clear he still cares for you. He hates me. Hate and love are closer than most folks think. Both require passion." He was quiet for a moment. "You loved him too." It wasn't a question. Maggie closed her eyes, remembering. "Yes, but that was before everything fell apart, before I became someone even I don't recognize." "Maybe it's time to stop running, Maggie, or whatever your real name is." She looked at him then, this unusual preacher who'd shown her more kindness in 3 days than she'd known in months. "Clara, my name is Clara Monroe." "Clara," he smiled. "It suits you better than Margaret." "You can't tell anyone." "I won't, but secrets have a way of revealing themselves. Better to control that revelation than let it control you." Outside, the bell tower chimed noon. Clara rose, smoothing her skirts. "I should go, Mrs. Carlyle will wonder where I am." The invitation stands, for the church social, for friendship, for whatever help you need. She paused at the door. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Caleb considered the question. "Maybe because I know what it's like to run from something. Maybe because I see in you what I once saw in myself, someone who thinks they're beyond redemption, but isn't." He smiled. "Or maybe just because it's the right thing to do." Clara left the church with her heart both lighter and heavier than before. Lighter because someone knew her truth and hadn't condemned her. Heavier because now she had something to lose. As she walked back to the boarding house, she didn't see Ethan Cole watching from the shadows of the livery stable, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. She didn't see Sam Watson making notes in his ledger, already composing the telegraph he would send east. She didn't see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, promising the kind of weather that could change everything. But Caleb saw. standing in the doorway of his church. The preacher who wanted a bride watched the woman he was beginning to care for walk toward a reckoning she couldn't avoid, and he prayed for wisdom, for strength, and for the courage to stand beside her when that reckoning came. The drought had been building for weeks, but it was the dust storm that announced its arrival with true authority. Clara, still Maggie to everyone but Caleb, stood at the boarding house window, watching the horizon disappear behind a wall of brown that seemed to swallow the world. The air itself turned hostile, charged with grit and the smell of dying earth. "Lord have mercy." "Mrs.," Carlyle muttered, rushing to secure shutters. "Haven't seen one this bad since '73. Lost half the cattle that year." Within hours, Cedar Ridge transformed into a town under siege. The storm howled through the streets like a living thing, rattling windows and stripping paint from buildings. When it finally passed 3 days later, it left behind a landscape of devastation, wells clogged with sand, crops withered, and cattle wandering desperate for water. "We need to organize," Ethan Cole declared at the emergency town meeting. He stood at the front of the crowded church, commanding attention with the natural authority of a man who'd built his fortune through sheer will. "The creek's down to a trickle, but there's still water in the canyon springs, 15 miles north. We drive the herds there, set up a rotation system." "And who put you in charge?" Sam Watson interrupted. "You've been gone 5 years. Cole, this ain't your town anymore." "It's nobody's town if we all die of thirst." Ethan shot back. "I've got 30 hands and enough wagons to haul water barrels. Question is whether you folks are too proud to accept help." Clara watched from her spot in the back pew, noting how Ethan carefully avoided looking in her direction. Since their wordless encounter the week before, he'd kept his distance, though she felt his presence like a constant pressure at the edge of her awareness. "Pride's a luxury we can't afford," Caleb interjected calmly. "Mister, Cole's plan makes sense, but we'll need everyone's cooperation. The women will need to organize water distribution here in town." "I'll help with that," Clara heard herself say. Every head turned toward her, and she forced herself to continue. I helped coordinate relief efforts during a typhoid outbreak back home. I understand the logistics of rationing." "And where exactly was home?" Watson's wife, Prudence, asked with false sweetness. Before Clara could stumble through another lie, Ethan spoke. "Does it matter? We need all the help we can get." His eyes found hers for just a moment. "Miss Thornfield's offer is appreciated." The meeting continued, plans taking shape with the desperate efficiency of people facing disaster. When it ended, Clara found herself swept into a group of women discussing distribution points and rationing schedules. For the first time since arriving, she felt useful, her education and experience finally serving a purpose beyond mere survival. 2 gallons per family per day, she suggested, making quick calculations. "We'll need to establish collection times to prevent hoarding." "Listen to her, giving orders like she owns the place," Prudence Watson hissed to her companion. "Mark my words, that woman's hiding something." Clara's hands stilled on the paper where she'd been writing figures, but before she could retreat, strong fingers touched her elbow. "Don't mind them, Mrs.," Garrison said firmly. The rancher's wife had a no-nonsense manner that reminded Clara of her own mother. "Scared people show their worst selves. You're doing good work here." The next days blurred together in a haze of dust and desperation. Clara threw herself into the relief efforts, coordinating with the other women, helping to dig out wells, tending to children whose parents were out searching for water. She was distributing the daily rations when Ethan appeared, leading a train of wagons loaded with precious water barrels. 40 barrels, he announced to the gathered crowd. "Should hold us for a week if we're careful." The townspeople surged forward, but Clara and her volunteers maintained order, checking names against their lists, ensuring fair distribution. She was so focused on the task that she didn't notice Ethan approaching until he spoke. "You always were good in a crisis." Her hands fumbled with the ladle. Please don't. Don't what? Acknowledge that I know you, that we have history. His voice was low, meant only for her. How long did you think you could keep pretending? Clara. That's not my name here. No. What are you calling yourself, Margaret? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You couldn't even pick a name that didn't sound like you. I had to become someone else. You wouldn't understand. Try me. The words came out harder than he'd intended. Around them, people were starting to notice their intense conversation. Ethan grabbed an empty barrel, gesturing for her to follow. Help me with this. They moved away from the crowd, toward the storage shed, once inside. Surrounded by the smell of grain and leather, the years seemed to fall away. Why? Ethan asked simply. Why did you leave without a word? Why did you let me think? He stopped, jaw working. I searched for you, hired detectives. Your family said you were dead. They would. Clara's voice was bitter. It was easier for them. The scandal. What scandal? You were engaged to me. We were happy. Then suddenly you vanished. And the next thing I hear, you're supposedly ruined. Your family in disgrace. Because of me. The words tore from her throat. Because I trusted the wrong person. Because I was fool enough to believe. She pressed her hands to her face. My father's business partner. He made advances. When I refused, he spread lies, said I had encouraged him, that I had compromised myself. My father believed him over me, said the only way to save the family's reputation was for me to marry the man. Ethan went very still. Clarence Morrison. You knew. I knew he wanted you. I didn't know. His hands clenched. I would have killed him. And hung for it. I couldn't let that happen. So I ran. Became someone else. Let everyone believe what they wanted. She met his eyes. Including you. You could have told me. I would have stood by you. Would you? Would you really have married a woman whose reputation was destroyed? Whose own father cast her out? She shook her head. I have learned what happens to women who carry scandal. They become pariahs. Their shame touches everyone near them. You don't know me very well if you think I give a damn about society's opinion. I knew you well enough to know you deserved better. They stood in silence. Years of pain and misunderstanding hanging between them like the dust in the air. Finally, Ethan spoke. Is that why you're here running still? I thought I could disappear, become someone anonymous. But even here, she gestured helplessly. The questions, the suspicion, it follows me like a shadow. Not everyone's against you. The preacher seems to have taken a shine to you. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Caleb's been kind, nothing more. Caleb, is it? Ethan's smile held an edge. Man looks at you like you hung the moon. Can't say I blame him. Don't what notice feel? He stepped closer. You think I stopped caring just because you disappeared? You think I built all this? He gestured toward the window, where his men were unloading more supplies, without remembering who I was building it for. You don't know me anymore. I'm not the girl you courted in Philadelphia. That girl is gone. Is she? His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped. Because I see her every time you help someone without being asked. Every time you stand up straight when you want to run. She's still there. Clara, just buried under all that guilt you're carrying. The shed door banged open. Prudence Watson stood there, eyes bright with malicious triumph. Well, how cozy. And here I thought you were a respectable woman, Miss Thornfield, or should I say, Miss Monroe. Clara's blood turned to ice. How? My husband has connections back east. A few telegrams, a few questions. Clara Monroe, the disgraced daughter who fled Philadelphia after a shocking scandal. And now here you are, carrying on with not one but two men. That's enough. Ethan's voice could have cut glass. You'll keep your poisonous tongue to yourself, Mrs. Watson, or answer to me. Threatening me, Mr. Cole. How gallant, though I suppose you would defend her, considering your prior attachment. Prudence's smile was venomous. Oh yes, we know about that too, the whole sordid story. How appropriate that you've both ended up here, in the dust where you belong. She swept out, leaving devastation in her wake. Clara sank onto a grain sack, trembling. It's over. By nightfall, everyone will know. Then we face it together. We, Clara laughed brokenly. There is no we. Ethan, there hasn't been for 2 years. There could be. The door opened again, but this time it was Caleb. He took in the scene, Clara's distress. Ethan's protective stance and his expression hardened slightly. There's trouble. Watson stirring up a mob, talking about moral corruption and casting out sinners. Clara, you need to come with me, now. Let them come, Ethan growled. And what, you'll fight the whole town that'll help her reputation? Caleb's voice was steady but urgent. Clara, I can protect you at the parsonage. Give people time to cool down. Remember that you've been helping them all week. Running again, Clara said quietly. It's all I know how to do anymore. Not running, strategic retreat. Caleb offered his hand. Trust me. She looked between the two men, Ethan, representing a past that wouldn't stay buried, and Caleb, offering a future she didn't deserve. Finally, she took Caleb's hand and let him lead her from the shed. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly on a town already fevered with drought and now inflamed with scandal. As they hurried toward the church, Clara could see faces in windows, hear the whispers spreading like wildfire. The girl from Philadelphia, the scandal, the shame. But also the woman who'd helped save their water, who'd tended their children, who'd stood with them against disaster. The storm was coming not of dust this time, but of human judgment. And Clara Monroe, who had run so far and so long, finally had nowhere left to hide. The parsonage was a modest structure attached to the church, its walls thick adobe that kept the interior cool despite the blazing sun outside. Clara sat in Caleb's simple kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. Through the window, she could see townsfolk gathering in small groups, their faces animated with the excitement of fresh scandal. The full story, Caleb said quietly, sitting across from her. I need to know what we're dealing with. Clara had told this story only once before to a sympathetic aunt who'd helped her escape Philadelphia. Now, haltingly, she told it again. Marcus Hallworth, her father's business partner, the evening he'd cornered her in the library during a dinner party. Her refusal, his rage, the lies he'd spread afterward. He said I'd been meeting him secretly for months. She continued, her voice steady despite the shame that still burned. That I'd encouraged his attention, then tried to blackmail him when he wanted to end things. My father had invested everything in their partnership. When Hallworth threatened to withdraw his backing and ruin us, Father chose to believe him. Your own father, Caleb murmured. He said the only solution was for me to marry Hallworth, make the rumors retrospectively respectable. When I refused, she closed her eyes. He told me I was no longer his daughter, that I could marry Hallworth, enter a convent, or leave with nothing but the clothes on my back. So you left? My aunt helped, gave me money, helped me create a new identity. But Ethan, I was engaged to Ethan then. I couldn't face him, couldn't bear to see his love turn to disgust when he learned what people were saying about me. You didn't trust him. The accusation, gently spoken, still stung. I was 22 years old. My whole world had collapsed in a single day. Trust wasn't something I had left to give. Through the window, she saw Sam Watson holding court near the well, gesturing dramatically. The crowd around him was growing. There's more, Clara said. Something I haven't told anyone, not even my aunt. Caleb waited, patient as stone. Hallworth didn't just spread rumors. He hired men to follow me, to make sure I couldn't tell my side of the story. When I tried to go to a newspaper editor, someone who'd been a friend of my mother's, I was warned off, told that if I spoke publicly, there would be consequences. What kind of consequences? The kind that happen in dark alleys, the kind that get blamed on random violence. Her voice dropped. I think that's why my aunt hurried me away so quickly. She was afraid for my life. Caleb's expression darkened. This Hallworth, is he still a threat? I don't know. It's been 2 years. He got what he wanted, my silence, my disappearance, my father's business. Maybe he's forgotten about me. Men like that don't forget. They just wait. Caleb stood, pacing to the window. Watson's working them up. We need to get ahead of this before... The door burst open. Ethan strode in without invitation, his face thunderous. There's a man at the hotel, came in on the afternoon stage. Well-dressed, Eastern accent. He's been asking questions about a woman matching Clara's description. Clara's cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor. No, it can't be. Name's Jeb Rawlins. Says he's a private detective. Ethan's eyes were hard. But I've seen enough hired guns to recognize one. Whatever he's hunting, it ain't for any legal bounty. Hallworth, Clara whispered. He found me. Like hell. Ethan's hand went to his gun. He wants to try something. He'll find the West plays by different rules. Violence won't solve this. Caleb intervened. If he's really connected to this Hallworth, killing him will only bring more trouble. Then what do you suggest? Preacher, let him take her back to whatever's waiting. I suggest we find out what he wants first. Knowledge before action. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Caleb moved to answer it. Finding Mrs. Garrison on the threshold. Reverend, you need to know Sam Watson's got folks pretty worked up. They're talking about casting out evil influences, purifying the town. Some of the rougher element from the saloons are getting involved. She peered past him to where Clara sat. Miss, whatever your past, you helped my children during the drought. That counts for something in my book. But you need to be careful. Thank you, Clara managed. After Mrs. Garrison left, Caleb turned to face them. We need a plan. Clara can't stay hidden here forever, and running again isn't the answer. Agreed. Ethan said, Time to stop running and start fighting. With what? Clara stood, anger finally breaking through her fear. You want to fight rumors, fight the truth. Yes, I fled a scandal. Yes, I've been lying about who I am. Those facts won't change no matter how many guns you wave around. Then we change the narrative, Caleb said thoughtfully. Watson's painting you as some kind of Jezebel, but the town's also seen you work tirelessly during the crisis. We remind them of that, give them a different story to believe. And Rawlins. I'll handle him, Ethan said flatly. No, Clara squared her shoulders. I won't have blood on my hands, not yours, not anyone's. I'll meet with him, find out what he wants. Absolutely not, both men said simultaneously. It's not your choice, the words exploded from her. I'm so tired of men making decisions for me. My father, Hallworth, and now you two. I may have run before, but I'm done being a victim in my own story. A crowd's roar from outside interrupted them. Through the window, they could see Watson leading what looked like half the town toward the church. Some carried torches despite the daylight theater for intimidation. Cast out the harlot, someone shouted. Cleanse our town of sin. Seems the decision's been made for us, Ethan said grimly. Back door. This is still a church, Caleb said, steel in his voice. They want to act like a mob on sacred ground. They'll have to go through me. He looked at Clara. Stay inside. Whatever happens, stay inside. He stepped out onto the church steps, and Clara watched through the window as he faced down the crowd. Even from here, She could see the authority he projected, not the gentle shepherd now, but something harder, more primal. "You've come to God's house with torches and anger." Caleb's voice carried clearly. "Tell me, which of you is without sin? Which of you has the right to cast the first stone?" "Don't quote scripture at us," Watson shouted. "You're harboring a woman of loose morals, a liar and worse." "I'm harboring a woman who spent the last week saving your families from thirst. Who is she, the helper you praised yesterday? Or the sinner you condemn today? She deceived us, as many of you have deceived others. Tom McKay, didn't you sell watered whiskey before you found religion, Mrs. Patterson? Didn't you arrive here claiming to be a widow when your husband was alive and well in Kansas? We're all running from something. The question is whether we let people run towards something better." The crowd stirred uneasily. Some of the torches lowered. Then a new voice cut through, smooth, cultured, with the kind of authority that came from money and position. "Perhaps I can shed some light on the situation." Jeb Rawlins stepped from the shadows of the hotel across the street. He was exactly what Clara had feared, well-dressed, confident, with the cold eyes of a man who did distasteful things for good pay. "Miss Monroe has indeed been deceiving you all," Rawlins continued. "But her sins go deeper than mere lies. She's a thief who stole valuable property from her employer. I am here to retrieve both her and what she took." "Liar!" The word tore from Clara's throat as she burst from the parsonage. "I stole nothing." "No," Rawlins smiled. "Then you won't mind explaining what happened to the documents you took from Mr. Hallworth's safe, the ones that could prove quite embarrassing to certain business arrangements." Clara's mind reeled. Documents she'd taken nothing but the clothes on her back when she fled. Unless... "My aunt," she breathed. Her aunt had insisted on packing her valise, had been alone with it before Clara left. She must have... Comprehension dawns. Rollins' smile widened. "Your aunt thought she was protecting you, giving you leverage. Instead, she made you a criminal. Return what you stole. And Mr. Hallworth might be persuaded to show mercy. And if she doesn't," Ethan had materialized beside Clara, his presence a shield, "then I'm authorized to use whatever means necessary to retrieve the property." Rollins' hand shifted, revealing the gun beneath his coat. "The law is on my side here." "Your law," Ethan said softly, "not ours." The tension crackled like lightning. The crowd, which had come for the simple satisfaction of casting out a fallen woman, now found itself in the middle of something far more dangerous. "I don't have any documents," Clara said clearly. "I didn't even know they existed." "Then we'll have to search your belongings. Thoroughly." The threat in Rollins's voice was unmistakable. "Over my dead body," Ethan growled. "That can be arranged?" "Enough," Caleb stepped between them. "This is a matter for the law. Our law. Sheriff Martinez can handle any questions of theft, but there'll be no vigilante justice, no private enforcement. Not in my town." "Your town," Watson spluttered. "You're just a preacher." "I'm a preacher who's done being patient with mobs and bullies." Caleb's voice carried a warning that made even Rollins step back slightly. "Miss Monroe stays under the church's protection until this matter is resolved legally. Anyone who tries to take her by force will answer to me and to God." The standoff stretched taut. Then, from the back of the crowd, old Mrs. Martinez spoke up. "The señorita helped my family. She stays." "She helped mine too," another voice added. Then another. Not everyone Watson's faction remained hostile, but enough. The tide was turning. Rollins' expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. All of you, mister. Hallworth has resources you can't imagine. Cross him, and this whole town will suffer. Then we'll suffer together." Caleb said simply, "That's what communities do." The detective retreated, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. The crowd began to disperse, some shamefaced, others still muttering. As the immediate danger passed, Clara felt her knees give. Both Ethan and Caleb reached for her, and for a moment the three of them stood frozen in an awkward tableau. "Inside," Caleb said quietly. "All of us. We need to figure out what these documents are and why they're worth killing for." As they returned to the parsonage, Clara realized the secret she'd been running from had just become far more dangerous than mere social scandal. Whatever her aunt had hidden in her belongings, it was worth enough to bring a hired killer across half the continent. The past she'd tried so hard to bury had not only caught up, it had evolved into something deadlier than she'd ever imagined. The sun had barely crept above the horizon when the pounding came at the church door. Caleb, who'd spent the night keeping watch in the sanctuary, opened it to find Sheriff Martinez looking grim. "Padre, we got trouble. That fancy detective's been busy. He's got telegrams from a judge back east, warrants, official papers. Says he's got legal authority to search any property for stolen documents." Inside the parsonage, Clara had been going through her few belongings for the third time, searching for whatever her aunt might have hidden. She'd found nothing but ordinary items: clothes, her mother's Bible, some jewelry she'd been afraid to sell. "How long do we have?" Caleb asked. "He's giving folks time to come to their senses. He says sundown. After that," Martinez shrugged. "I'm just one man, Padre. If he's got legal papers, I can't stop him." After the sheriff left, Caleb found Clara in the kitchen, staring at her open valise. Ethan was there too, having refused to leave despite the impropriety of the situation. "There's nothing here," Clara said desperately. "I've checked every hem, every lining. If my aunt hid something, I can't find it." "Maybe that's the point," Ethan said. "Maybe there never were any documents. Maybe Holworth just wants you back, and this is his excuse." "No," Clara shook her head. "Rollins was too specific. He knows something's there." She picked up her mother's Bible, running her fingers along its worn cover. "This is the only thing of value I have, and it's just sentimental." She stopped. The binding felt different, thicker than it should be. With trembling fingers, she found the edge where the leather had been carefully re-glued. Inside, pressed flat between the cover and the end paper, were several folded documents. "Mother of God!" Ethan breathed as they spread the papers on the table. They were letters, written in Holworth's hand. But these weren't business documents, they were correspondence with various officials, discussing bribes, illegal land deals, and most damning, a scheme to defraud the government on military supply contracts during the last year of the war. "My aunt knew," Clara whispered. "She must have taken these from his safe when she went to confront him about me. She gave me protection without telling me." "Protection that could get you killed," Caleb said grimly. "This is evidence of treason. Clara, men have hung for less." "Which means Holworth can't let you live," Ethan added. "Not with what you know." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Rollins addressing a growing crowd, Watson at his side. The detective held up what looked like official documents, his voice carrying clearly. "Harboring a federal fugitive is a serious crime. Anyone who aids her will be considered an accomplice. Mr. Holworth is prepared to be generous $1,000 to whoever provides information leading to the recovery of his property." "Judas money," someone called out. But others were listening with interest. $1,000 was more than most would see in years. "We need to get you out of town," Ethan said. "I've got friends in Mexico." "No more running." Clara's voice was steady. "Don't you see, as long as these documents exist, I'll never be free. Neither will anyone who helps me." She looked at both men. "There's only one way to end this." "Clara, no!" Caleb started. "I'm going to face him. Publicly. Let the whole town hear the truth." She gathered the documents. "If Rollins wants to make this about law and justice, then let's give him law and justice." The church bell rang out not the regular call to worship, but an urgent summons that brought people running. Within minutes, the sanctuary was filling with townspeople drawn by curiosity and the promise of drama. Clara stood at the pulpit, an unlikely figure in her simple dress, holding papers that could destroy powerful men. Rollins entered with Watson and several rough-looking associates, his composure slipping when he saw her position. "Miss Monroe, I advise you to surrender those documents immediately." These documents, Clara held them high. The ones that prove Marcus Holworth committed treason, that he stole from the Union Army while men were dying for lack of supplies. Lies Rollins stepped forward. "Those are forgeries, written in his own hand with his seal." Clara's voice grew stronger. "Shall I read them aloud? Let everyone hear how he bribed Senator Walsh, how he arranged for spoiled meat and defective ammunition to be sold at premium prices." "You have no right?" "I have every right." The words rang out like shots. "He destroyed my reputation with lies. He tried to force me into marriage to keep me silent. And when I ran, he sent killers after me. But I won't be silent anymore." She began to read. Holworth's own words, damning and clear. The crowd listened in growing horror as the scope of the corruption became clear. Even Watson looked shaken. Rollins drew his gun. "That's enough." But he'd miscalculated. This wasn't Philadelphia, where power and money ruled absolutely. This was Cedar Ridge, where many had fought in the war, had lost friends and family to battles that might have gone differently with proper supplies. "You pull that trigger in God's house, you'll never leave here alive." Tom McKay said quietly. The blacksmith had served with the Colorado Volunteers. Around him, other veterans nodded agreement. "This is federal business." "This is our business now." Sheriff Martinez interrupted, entering with his own gun drawn. "Miss Monroe, I'll need those documents as evidence. Mr. Rollins, you're under arrest for threatening a citizen and disturbing the peace." "You can't arrest me. I have papers." "Papers from a traitor don't mean much here," Martinez said. "Drop the gun." For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then Ethan spoke from where he'd positioned himself. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Rollins, question is, do you want to die for a man who'd sell out his own country for profit?" Rollins looked around the church, seeing hard faces and harder resolve. Slowly, he let his gun fall. But Clara wasn't finished. Stepping down from the pulpit, she faced the crowd that had been so ready to condemn her. "Yes, I lied about my name. Yes, I ran from scandal, but I'm not the woman Marcus Holworth painted me to be. I'm just someone who refused to be bought, who wouldn't trade my conscience for comfort." Her eyes found Watson. "How many of you can say the same?" "What happened back east?" someone called out. "The real story." So she told them, simply, without dramatics, a powerful man's unwanted advances, the price of refusal, the impossibility of fighting wealth and influence without allies. When she finished, the church was silent. Then Mrs. Garrison stood. "Seems to me Miss Monroe or Miss Thornfield, or whatever she wants to be called, has shown more courage than most. She's welcome in this town as far as I'm concerned." Others voiced agreement. Not all some would never forgive the deception, but enough. The tide had turned decisively. "There's still the matter of Holworth," Rollins said, struggling against Martinez's grip. "He won't let this go. He has resources." "Had resources," Ethan corrected. "These documents are going to the federal marshals, along with a full report. By the time they're done, Holworth will be too busy staying out of prison to worry about revenge." As Martinez led Rollins away, Clara felt her strength finally give out. She sank into a pew, the documents scattered around her papers that had nearly cost her life but had ultimately bought her freedom. Caleb sat beside her, careful of propriety even now. That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. Sometimes they're the same thing, she managed. "What now?" Ethan asked, standing before them. "The truth's out. You're free to be whoever you want, go wherever you want." The unspoken question hung between them: would she stay? And if she stayed, with whom? Clara looked between the two men who'd stood by her, Caleb with his quiet strength and unwavering faith, Ethan with his passionate protection and shared history. Both had risked everything for her. Both deserved more than she felt capable of giving. "I don't know," she said honestly. "For 2 years, I've defined myself by what I was running from. I need to discover who I am when I'm not afraid anymore." Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows that had clung to Cedar Ridge. The drought hadn't broken, but something else had the town's isolation, its rigid judgments, its fear of the different and damaged. In the days that followed, as federal marshals arrived to investigate and Hallworth's empire crumbled from afar, Clara would begin the slow work of building a life not based on lies or fear. She would have choices to make about love, about home, about the person she wanted to become. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary where truth had finally conquered deception, she simply sat between two good men and let herself feel something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The rains came 3 weeks after Rollins was taken away in chains, breaking the drought with a violence that matched the town's recent upheavals. Clara stood at the boarding house window, watching the parched earth drink deeply, and tried to make sense of her new reality. She was free. The federal marshals had confirmed it. Marcus Hallworth was under investigation, his assets frozen, his influence shattered. The scandal that had driven her west was now his to bear. Her name had been cleared in Philadelphia society. Not that she had any intention of returning. "You've been standing there for an hour," Mrs. Carlyle observed, bringing her a cup of tea. The landlady had been markedly warmer since the truth came out. "Wool gathering won't solve whatever's troubling you." "I'm not troubled," Clara said. "I'm unfettered. It's a strange feeling after so long." "And those 2 men dancing attendance on you have nothing to do with your mood." Clara smiled despite herself. It had indeed been a dance, elaborate and careful. Ethan bringing her wildflowers from his rides, discussing plans for expanding his ranch, talking about the future in terms that always seemed to include her. Caleb finding reasons to seek her help with church matters, their conversations ranging from theology to literature. Comfortable silences that spoke louder than words. "They're both good men," she said carefully. "That they are. Question is, which one's the right man?" Before Clara could answer, she saw a familiar figure splashing through the muddy street. Ethan, soaked to the skin but grinning, leading a string of horses toward the livery stable. He looked up, caught sight of her in the window, and touched his hat brim in salute. Her heart did a complicated thing in her chest. An hour later, dried off and presentable, Ethan found her at the schoolhouse where she'd been volunteering, helping to teach the younger children their letters. The regular teacher, Miss Patterson, had welcomed the assistance, especially from someone with Clara's education. "Walk with me," Ethan asked when the lessons were done. They strolled toward the edge of town, where the rain had brought the desert briefly to life. Tiny flowers pushed through the soil, and the air smelled clean and new. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, "about second chances, about time lost and what we do with time that's left." Ethan, "Let me say this, Clara, please." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I failed you before. When you needed someone to fight for you, I wasn't there. I let pride and hurt feelings blind me to what must have really happened. I can't change that, but I can promise that I'll never fail you again." "You didn't fail me. You didn't even know—" "I should have known, should have trusted what I knew of your character over any rumors." He took her hands, his calloused fingers gentle. "I've spent 2 years building something out here. A good spread, strong reputation, future prospects, but none of it meant anything because you weren't there to share it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you. Still. Always. I'm saying that if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me isn't misplaced." Clara felt tears threaten. This was Ethan as she remembered him, direct, passionate, certain. He was offering her everything she'd once dreamed of: security, position, a love that had survived separation and scandal. "I need time," she said softly, "to think, to be sure I'm choosing for the right reasons. Time I can give you. I've waited 2 years. I can wait longer." He squeezed her hands gently. "Just don't ask me to pretend I don't hope." That evening, she found herself in the church, helping Caleb prepare for Sunday service. It had become a routine of sorts: quiet hours, arranging flowers, mending hymn books, talking about everything and nothing. "Ethan proposed," she said suddenly, surprising herself. Caleb's hands stilled on the Bible he'd been studying. "I see." "That's all, just I see. What would you have me say?" He looked up, and she was struck by the pain in his eyes. "That I'm happy for you, that I hope you'll refuse. Neither would be entirely honest." "Then be honest." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "A man chooses with faith, not with fear. That's what I told Ethan once. About you, I should follow my own advice." He rose, came to stand before her, even in the simple church, with dust motes dancing in the late light. There was something profound in the moment. "I'm not a rich man. Clara, I can't offer you a grand ranch or social position. I'm just a preacher in a small town, trying to serve God and help people find their better selves." He paused. "But I can offer you a partnership. Someone who sees you not as you were or as you might be, but as you are. Someone who fell in love with your courage before he even knew your real name." "Caleb, you asked for honesty. The truth is, I love you. The truth is, it tears at me to think of you with him, even knowing he loved you first, even knowing he probably deserves you more. The truth is, I'll accept whatever decision you make, but I couldn't let you make it without knowing that you have a choice." The rain started again, drumming on the church roof. Clara found herself caught between two futures, two very different men who both offered love, acceptance, redemption. "I don't know how to choose," she whispered. You both saved me." "No," Caleb shook his head. "You saved yourself. We just stood witness." The church door opened, bringing a gust of wet wind and an unexpected figure. Mrs. Garrison entered, shaking water from her coat, followed by several other townswomen. "Sorry to interrupt, Reverend, but we have a problem. The storms washed out the bridge to the Henderson homestead. Sarah Henderson's time has come, and Doc Morrison can't get across. She's asking for you." Caleb was already reaching for his coat. "Of course." "I'll come," Clara said. "I helped with birthings back home." "The crossing's dangerous." Ethan had appeared in the doorway, obviously having followed Clara to the church. "Let me take you. My horse can handle the current better than the preacher's old mare." And so they went together, all three of them, into the storm. Ethan's strength got them across the swollen creek. Caleb's presence calmed the frightened family. Clara's knowledge and steady hands helped bring new life into the world as thunder crashed overhead. It was nearly dawn when they returned to town, exhausted but triumphant. Baby and mother were both well. The storm had passed, and the first light was painting the mountains gold. "Look at us," Clara said, giddy with fatigue and success. "We make a good team." "We do," Ethan agreed, but his eyes were troubled. He'd watched Clara and Caleb work together through the night, seen the wordless communication between them, the shared purpose. All of us. They parted at the boarding house, Ethan to his hotel. Caleb to prepare for morning service despite his exhaustion. Clara to catch what sleep she could, but sleep eluded her. Instead, she found herself thinking about the night's events, about partnerships and purposes, about different kinds of love. When she emerged for the noon meal, she found the town buzzing with news. The federal marshals had sent word Marcus Holworth had been arrested. his attempts to flee the country thwarted. Multiple witnesses had come forward once his power was broken. Clara's vindication was complete. "You could go back, Mrs." Carlyle said carefully. "To Philadelphia, your family, your real life." "This is my real life," Clara replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Whatever I decide, it won't be about running back to something. It'll be about moving forward to something better." That afternoon, she found both men at the church, Ethan helping Caleb repair storm damage to the roof. They worked in easy partnership, two very different men united in purpose. When they saw her, both stopped, and she could read her answer in their faces. Hope, fear, love, all the emotions she herself was feeling, reflected back at her. "I've made my decision," she said. The words hung in the air like the pause between lightning and thunder, pregnant with change. Both men climbed down from the roof, standing before her the wealthy rancher and the humble preacher, the past and the possible future, both offering their hearts without reservation. Clara looked between them, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time Ethan, who represented everything she'd once wanted: security, passion, a reclaiming of what was lost. Caleb, who offered something she'd never known to want: partnership, purpose, a love built on seeing truly rather than seeing partially. "Before I tell you," she said, "I need you both to know something. These weeks have shown me that I'm stronger than I knew, that I can stand on my own, make my own way. I'm not choosing out of need or fear or gratitude. I'm choosing out of love. And I'm choosing—" Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising more rain. The desert would bloom, briefly but brilliantly, made more beautiful by its struggles, like her, like all of them. She spoke a name, and the world shifted, futures crystallizing and dissolving in a single word. One man's face lit with joy, while another's showed resignation and pain, but also, somehow, acceptance. Because that's what love did. In the end, it chose, and having chosen, it faced whatever storms might come with faith instead of fear. "Ethan," she had said, and watched Caleb's face compose itself into lines of gracious defeat even as Ethan stepped forward to sweep her into his arms. But that had been 3 days ago, and now Clara stood in Mrs. Carlyle's best parlor, wearing her mother's pearl earrings and a dress of soft blue wool that had arrived on yesterday's stage, a gift from Ethan, who seemed determined to shower her with everything she'd been denied during her years of exile. "You're fretting, Mrs." Garrison observed, adjusting the orange blossoms in Clara's hair, as the closest thing to a mother figure Clara had in Cedar Ridge. She'd taken charge of the wedding preparations. "Second thoughts." "No," Clara said quickly. Then, more honestly, "Not about Ethan. Just, everything's happening so fast. 3 days is quick for a wedding, even out here. But I suppose Mr. Cole's not a patient man when he knows what he wants." Through the window, Clara could see the church where, in less than an hour, she would become Mrs. Ethan Cole. Caleb would perform the ceremony. He'd insisted on it, saying it was his duty as the town's minister. The nobility of the gesture had nearly broken her heart. "Clara," a knock came at the door. "May I come in?" It was Ethan, which caused Mrs. Garrison to flutter in protest. "It's bad luck to see the bride before—" "Please," Clara interrupted, "just for a moment." When they were alone, Ethan took her hands, studying her face with those whiskey-colored eyes that had first captured her heart years ago. "You look beautiful," he said, "but troubled. If you need more time—" "No, She struggled to find words for the unease she felt. "Promise me something. Promise me we're not just trying to recapture what we had before, that we're building something new." "Clara, what we had before was built on half-truths and society's expectations. This us, here, now this is real. We've both been tested by fire and come through stronger." He lifted her hands to his lips. I don't want the girl you were. I want the woman you've become. It was the right answer, and Clara felt some of her anxiety ease. Yet, as Ethan left and she prepared for the short walk to the church, something still felt unsettled, like a note slightly out of tune in an otherwise perfect melody. The church was full when she arrived. It seemed all of Cedar Ridge had turned out, even those who'd been ready to cast her out just weeks before. She saw Sam Watson in a back pew, his expression sour, but his presence a grudging acknowledgement of her new status. Sheriff Martinez stood near the door, nodding respectfully. The Hendersons were there with their new baby, living proof of the night that had changed everything. And at the altar stood Caleb, his ministerial robes unable to disguise the tension in his shoulders, the careful blankness of his expression. Beside him, Ethan waited, resplendent in a new black suit, his face glowing with triumph and love. Clara began the walk down the aisle on Tom McKay's arm the blacksmith had volunteered to give her away, saying any woman with her courage deserved an escort. Each step felt momentous, carrying her away from one life and toward another. Halfway down the aisle, the church door burst open. "Stop!" a woman's voice rang out, high and desperate. "Stop this wedding!" Everyone turned. In the doorway stood a young woman, perhaps 25, with auburn hair and a traveling dress covered in trail dust. She was pretty in a delicate way, but her face was drawn with exhaustion and something else desperation. "Lillian!" Ethan's voice was shocked, all color draining from his face. "What are you? How did you—" "I've been following you for months," the woman, Lillian said, advancing into the church. "Ever since you left Denver, did you think you could just disappear? That our marriage meant nothing?" The church erupted. Clara stood frozen, her bouquet of wildflowers trembling in her hands. Marriage Ethan was married. "That's a lie," Ethan roared. "We were never married." "We exchanged vows," Lillian insisted. "In front of witnesses. You promised to love me forever, then abandoned me when you heard she was free." Her eyes found Clara, filled with hatred. "You're the one, aren't you? The one he could never forget." "Well, you can't have him. He's mine by law and by right." "Those weren't legal vows," Ethan said desperately. "It was a drinking game, a joke at a saloon. You know that." "Do I—" "We stood before your friend Jake, who said the words. We exchanged promises. You gave me a ring." She held up her hand, where a simple band gleamed. "In this territory, that's considered binding." Clara found her voice. "Is this true, any of it?" Ethan turned to her, anguish in his eyes. "Clara, I swear to you it meant nothing. We were drunk, celebrating a cattle sale. Jake thought it would be funny to play preacher. I never imagined she'd take it seriously." "Seriously enough to share your bed for 3 months," Lillian added viciously. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt the flowers slip from her numb fingers. Around her, the wedding guests sat in stunned tableau, witnessing yet another scandal in a town that had seen too many. "Clara," Ethan reached for her, but she stepped back. "Please, let me explain." "What's to explain?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, calm and distant. "Either you're married or you're not. Either you lied to me or you didn't." "I didn't lie. I never considered it a real marriage." "But she did." Caleb spoke for the first time, his ministerial authority cutting through the chaos. "And if witnesses can attest to an exchange of vows and cohabitation, then the law might well consider it binding, regardless of your intent." "You'd like that, wouldn't you, preacher?" Ethan snarled, his control snapping. "You've been waiting for a chance to—" "Enough!" Clara's voice cracked like a whip. "Everyone stop!" She looked around the church at the eager faces hungry for more drama, at Lillian's desperate triumph, at Ethan's anguished guilt, at Caleb's carefully controlled expression. Then she gathered her skirts and walked back down the aisle, past the whispers and stares, out into the harsh sunlight. She made it to the cemetery before the tears came, sinking onto a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. She let them fall, tears of humiliation, of anger, of grief for the simple happiness that had once again been snatched away. She wasn't sure how long she sat there before she heard footsteps. Without looking up, she knew who it was. Caleb settled beside her, maintaining proper distance but close enough that she felt his solid presence. "I suppose you're going to tell me this is God's will," she said bitterly. "That I was saved from making a mistake." "No, I think you've had enough of men interpreting God's will for you." He handed her a handkerchief. "I will say that the truth, however painful, is better than a beautiful lie." "Is it? I was happy for 3 days, Caleb. 3 whole days where I thought my life was finally coming together. Was that so wrong?" "You were trying to resurrect something that died 2 years ago. Maybe it needed to stay buried." She turned to look at him then. Really look at him. His face showed compassion, but also something else, a carefully banked hope he was trying not to let show. "You still love me," she said. It wasn't a question. "That hasn't changed. It won't change. But this isn't about my feelings, Clara. It's about what you decide to do next." Back at the church, they could hear raised voices, Ethan and Lillian arguing, the crowd's excited chatter. Clara's wedding had become a circus, another scandal for the territory's gossips to feast on. "I can't stay here," she said. "Not after this. I'll be the woman who was jilted at the altar. On top of everything else, the whispers will never stop." "Or," Caleb said quietly, "you could be the woman who faced down every challenge this town threw at her and refused to be broken. Your choice." Before Clara could respond, Ethan appeared, disheveled and desperate. "Clara, please! You have to listen. Lillian is lying not about what happened, but about what it meant. She's been following me. Obsessed. I'll hire lawyers. Get it annulled." "With what grounds?" Clara stood, feeling strangely calm. "You exchanged vows. You lived together, whether you meant it or not. You made promises to her first, and despite everything, I won't be the woman who breaks up a marriage, valid or not." "Clara." "No, Ethan, we've been chasing shadows, trying to reclaim something that was lost the moment I left Philadelphia." She touched his face gently. "I loved who you were. You loved who I was. But we're different people now, shaped by different struggles. Maybe it's time we accepted that." "So you're choosing him?" Ethan's eyes flicked to Caleb with bitter understanding. "I'm choosing myself," Clara said firmly. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing based on who I am now, not who I was or who others think I should be." The sun was setting by the time she returned to the boarding house. The wedding guests had dispersed. The flowers had been cleared away, and Lillian had been installed at the hotel, proclaiming her rights as Mrs. Cold to anyone who'd listen. Tomorrow, lawyers would be summoned, papers filed, the mess sorted out one way or another. But tonight, Clara sat by her window and thought about choices, the ones forced on her and the ones she'd made freely. She thought about Caleb's words in the cemetery, about truth versus beautiful lies. She thought about the future, no longer defined by the past that had chased her so far. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs." Carlyle entered with a tea tray and a sympathetic expression. "Quite a day," the landlady said, "though I must say, you handled it with more grace than most would have." "I had a lot of practice with public humiliation," Clara said wryly. "What will you do now?" It was the question everyone would be asking. What would the notorious Clara Monroe, she decided to reclaim her real name, do next? Run again, hide, rage against the unfairness of it all. "I think," Clara said slowly, "I'll start by helping with the church's literacy program, then maybe see about establishing a proper school for the town's girls. After that, we'll see." "Mrs." Carlyle smiled. "That sounds like a fine plan. though I suspect a certain preacher will be pleased to have your help." Clara didn't answer, but something in her expression must have given her away, because the landlady patted her shoulder knowingly before leaving. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere in town, Ethan was dealing with the consequences of his careless past. Somewhere else, Caleb was probably praying for wisdom and guidance. And here, in her small room, Clara Monroe was finally, truly free, not from scandal or judgment, but from the need to define herself by either. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new gossip, new obstacles, but it would also bring new possibilities, and for the first time in years, she was ready to meet them head-on, with faith instead of fear. The preacher had wanted a bride. The rich cowboy had faced her past. But in the end, it was Clara who chose her own forever, one built not on passion or rescue, but on the solid ground of knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted. And if what she wanted happened to include a certain gentle-hearted minister who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, well, that was a choice for another day. Tonight, it was enough to be free. 5 years had passed since that interrupted wedding, and Cedar Ridge had grown from a dusty frontier town into a thriving community. The railroad had come through, bringing prosperity and new faces, though the old-timers still gathered at the general store to reminisce about the days when scandal and drought defined their existence. Clara Monroe stood before the new schoolhouse, watching her students file out for the day. The building was her pride, 2 stories of solid brick with real glass windows and a bell tower that rang each morning to summon the children of Cedar Ridge to their lessons. Not just the boys anymore, but girls too, learning mathematics and literature alongside their brothers. Miss Monroe, little Sarah Henderson, now 6 years old and bright as a button, tugged at her teacher's skirts. "Will you tell us more about the Continental Congress tomorrow?" "If you finish your arithmetic," Clara promised, smoothing the child's hair. Strange how life circled around she'd helped bring Sarah into the world during that terrible storm, and now she was helping shape her mind. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Clara walked toward the church, her daily ritual for the past 3 years. Inside, she found Caleb at his usual spot, bent over his sermon notes. He looked up at her entrance, and the smile that crossed his face still had the power to warm her from within. "How were the little heathens today?" he asked, setting aside his work. "Eager to learn, as always, though Tommy Watson did put a frog in Susie Clark's lunch pail." Some things never change. His father was doing the same thing 30 years ago, according to Mrs. Carlyle. They fell into comfortable conversation, discussing the upcoming harvest festival, the new families moving to town, the eternal challenge of keeping peace among strong-willed frontier folk. It was a partnership that had developed slowly, carefully, built on shared work and mutual respect. Neither spoke of the other thing between them, the love that had never faded, only deepened with time. Clara had needed space to establish herself independently, to prove she could stand alone. Caleb had given her that space, remaining her friend and supporter without pressing for more. But lately, Clara had begun to wonder if she'd waited too long. Other women had noticed Caleb's qualities, his gentleness coupled with strength, his dedication to the community, the way he looked in his shirt sleeves when he helped with barn raisings. Just last week, the new banker's daughter had made her interest quite clear. "Clara," Caleb's voice drew her from her thoughts. "You seem distracted." "Just thinking about time," she said, "how it passes, what we do with it." Before he could respond, the church door opened. They both turned, expecting a parishioner, but instead saw a figure neither had expected to see again. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway, older now, his face weathered by sun and hardship. His clothes were well made but dusty from travel, and there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke of more than physical exhaustion. "Hello, Clara, Reverend." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I hope I'm not intruding." Ethan. Clara's voice was steady, though her heart raced. We heard you'd moved to California. I did. Made a fortune in shipping. Lost most of it in bad investments. Made it back again in cattle. He smiled ruefully. Seems I'm better with animals than with people. What brings you back to Cedar Ridge? Caleb asked, his tone carefully neutral. Unfinished business. Ethan's eyes found Clara. I owe you an apology, a proper one, for everything. They moved outside, sitting on the church steps as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Ethan told his story how Lillian's claims had eventually been dismissed, but not before causing months of legal battles. How he'd left Cedar Ridge in shame and anger, blaming everyone but himself. How success had come easily, but satisfaction had remained elusive. I spent years being angry, he admitted. At you for leaving Philadelphia, at Lillian for her lies, at Caleb for... He paused, glancing at the minister. Well, for being a better man than me. But mostly I was angry at myself, for my carelessness, my pride, my inability to let go of the past. We all made mistakes, Clara said gently. We were different people then. You weren't. You were always exactly who you are, brave, principled, kind. I just couldn't see it through my own selfishness. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. I didn't come to stir up old troubles, just to say I'm sorry, and to wish you both the happiness you deserve. Both? Clara asked. Ethan smiled, a real smile this time. I'm not blind. Clara, never have been. The way you two look at each other, well, that's what I wanted us to have. But wanting isn't the same as earning. He nodded to Caleb. She chose you that day, preacher, even if she didn't say it out loud. Maybe it's time you both stopped pretending otherwise. He left them there on the steps, riding away into the sunset like something out of the dime novels that circulated through town. Clara and Caleb sat in silence, the truth of Ethan's words hanging between them. He's right, Clara said finally. I did choose you. I've been choosing you every day for 3 years. She took a breath. I needed to know I could stand alone before I could stand with someone. And now I know. I've built a life here, a purpose. I'm not running from anything or toward anything. I'm just ready. Caleb took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I've been ready since the day you walked into my church, but I would have waited another 5 years, 10, however long you needed. No more waiting, Clara said firmly. We've both waited long enough. The wedding, when it came 2 months later, was everything the first attempt hadn't been. Simple, honest, attended by people who'd come to know and respect them both. Mrs. Garrison stood as Clara's matron of honor, while Sheriff Martinez served as Caleb's best man. Even Sam Watson attended, his long-held grudges finally worn down by time and Clara's persistent kindness to his grandchildren. Dearly beloved, Caleb began, then stopped, laughing. I've performed dozens of weddings, but I find I'm at a loss for words when it's my own. Then speak from the heart, Clara suggested, smiling up at him. You've always been good at that. So he did, setting aside prepared remarks to speak of love tested by time, of faith that transcended fear, of two people who'd found in each other not completion, but complement. Clara responded in kind, promising to stand beside him in drought and plenty, in scandal and peace, in all the unknown adventures their frontier life might bring. When he kissed her, the church bell rang out, pulled enthusiastically by the school children. The sound carried across Cedar Ridge, announcing that their teacher and their preacher had finally stopped dancing around the truth everyone else had seen for years. The reception was held in the new schoolhouse, with fiddle music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Clara danced with everyone with Tom McKay, who'd given her away again successfully this time, with old Mrs. Martinez, who wept happy tears, with Sheriff Martinez, who warned Caleb he'd better treat her right, even with Sam Watson, who grudgingly admitted she'd been good for the town. But it was the quiet moments she treasured most, Caleb's hand in hers, his whispered promises between songs, the knowledge that they'd found their way to each other not through passion's shortcut but along the longer road of patience and trust. "No regrets?" Caleb asked as they took a breath of cool night air outside. "None," Clara said. "Every mistake, every scandal, every moment of despair, they all led here. I wouldn't change any of it. Even Ethan, especially Ethan. He taught me the difference between loving who someone was and loving who they are. You've always seen me clearly, even when I couldn't see myself." The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed her arrival in Cedar Ridge as a frightened fugitive. Now they looked down on Clara Monroe, Hart teacher, wife, respected member of the community she'd once feared would reject her. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Children who filled the parsonage with laughter and chaos. Droughts that tested the town's resolve. The arrival of the automobile that changed the frontier forever. Through it all, Clara and Caleb faced each trial together, their love deepened by struggle and strengthened by joy. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and memory, Clara would think about the journey that had brought her here. The preacher who'd wanted a bride had found so much more: a partner, an equal, a love worth waiting for. The rich cowboy who'd faced her past with newfound wisdom had helped her close that chapter with grace. And Clara herself, she'd chosen her forever not in a moment of passion or desperation, but with the clear-eyed certainty of a woman who knew her own worth. The old tree still stood by the church, the one where she'd once sat in despair after her first wedding fell apart. Now children played beneath its branches, her children and others, all of them growing up in a town that had learned to value second chances and the courage to begin again. "Mama," her daughter Rose asked one day, "why does the church bell sound so happy when it rings?" Clara smiled, thinking of all the stories that bell could tell. "Because it's calling people home, sweetheart. And there's no happier sound than that." In the end, that's what Cedar Ridge had become: home. Not perfect, not without its conflicts and challenges, but a place where broken people could rebuild, where scandal could give way to respect, where love could grow slowly and surely like the desert flowers that bloomed after rain. The preacher had wanted a bride, the woman had needed a place to belong, and in finding each other, they'd found something neither had dared to hope for: a love that faced the past with faith and chose its future with joy, forever and always, beneath the endless western sky. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West. I'm curious to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Caleb's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of frontier romance and drama, please subscribe to Wild West Night, give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the American frontier. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more tales of love and adventure with you. Until next time, partners.